Three terrifying stories from the most isolated roads. Story 1. The Man in the Back Seat. I was on a road trip to my dad's place. His cabin was about 9 hours away from where I lived. He had retired there a few years earlier, choosing a quiet little place surrounded by trees and mountains. It wasn't exactly in the middle of nowhere, but it was close enough that sometimes it felt like the rest of the world had simply disappeared. Getting there required turning off the main interstate and taking a long, lonely highway that stretched through miles and miles of forest. The kind of road where you could drive for hours without seeing another person. There were almost no gas stations, no restaurants, no houses, and definitely no towns. I'd made the drive 3 or 4 times before, so I wasn't unfamiliar with it. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. But there was something different about driving that road at 2 in the morning. During the day, the forest was just a forest. At night, it felt like something else. The trees became enormous black shapes on either side of the road. The headlights of my car illuminated only a small tunnel of asphalt in front of me, while everything beyond that disappeared into complete darkness. I'd been driving for about an hour and a half when the energy drinks I'd been using to keep myself awake finally started working. Unfortunately, they worked a little too well. I really needed to use the bathroom. There wasn't a gas station anywhere nearby, and I hadn't seen another car since leaving the interstate. So I decided to pull onto the shoulder. I turned off the road and parked. The engine was still running. I left my headlights on. For some reason, I remember checking the rearview mirror before opening my door. There was nothing behind me, just an empty road disappearing into the darkness. I stepped out. The cold air immediately hit me. I walked past the tree line and into the woods. It was dead silent. Not peaceful silence. The kind of silence that makes you suddenly aware of every tiny sound your own body is making. My shoes moving over dirt, my breathing, the distant ticking of my car's engine. I tried not to think about it. I was only going to be out there for a few seconds. Then I got that feeling. I can't really explain it. It wasn't an itch. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like my body suddenly knew something my brain hadn't figured out yet. Something was wrong. I quickly finished what I was doing and turned around. That's when I saw the car. There was another vehicle parked behind mine, an old gray sedan. It was sitting maybe 50 feet behind my car. The headlights were off. The engine wasn't making any obvious noise, and there was nobody standing outside. I just stared at it. I remember thinking that maybe I'd somehow missed it. Maybe it had driven past me while I was in the woods. But that didn't make sense. I had been listening to the road. I would have heard another car, and even if I hadn't heard it, I would have seen the headlights. Yet somehow, this car was now sitting directly behind mine. I suddenly felt very exposed. I was still standing in the trees. My car was several yards away, and there was a stranger parked behind it. I started walking back. My eyes stayed locked on the sedan. I couldn't see through the windows. They were either heavily tinted or the darkness was simply too thick. I couldn't tell if someone was sitting inside. I hoped it was just an old man who had seen my car pulled over and stopped to check if I needed help. That was the explanation I wanted to believe, but something about the situation felt wrong. I hurried to my car. I got inside, locked the doors, and immediately drove away. I didn't even look at the sedan as I passed it. For the first minute, I refused to check my mirrors. I didn't want to know. Because there was a part of me that was terrified the gray car would be following me. Finally, I forced myself to look. Nothing. The road behind me was completely empty. The gray sedan was gone. I actually felt relieved. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it had turned around. Maybe there had been a perfectly normal explanation. I continued driving, but then I noticed something. That feeling had returned. that strange, uncomfortable sensation I'd experienced in the woods. I looked at the road, then the mirror, then the road again. My heart began beating faster. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Then I glanced into the rearview mirror one more time, and I saw him, a man, sitting directly behind me, in my back seat. My entire body jolted. I nearly lost control of the car. The man was sitting in darkness, positioned just far enough to keep most of his body hidden from the mirror. But I could see his face, or at least part of it. He was staring directly at me. Before I could even react, he spoke. "Keep driving." His voice was deep, cold, threatening. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Don't look back." I immediately said, "Okay." I don't even remember saying it the first time. I just kept repeating it. "Okay. Okay. Okay." My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely keep them on the steering wheel. I couldn't understand how he had gotten into my car. The only explanation I could think of was that he had been following me. Maybe he'd parked behind me with his headlights off. Maybe he'd waited until I walked into the trees, and then he'd gotten into my car. The thought made my stomach turn. I kept driving. The man said nothing. Minutes passed. The only sounds were the engine and the tires against the road. Every few seconds, I could feel myself wanting to look back. But I didn't. I stared straight ahead. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I glanced into the mirror. Nothing. The back seat was almost completely dark. I could barely see his shoulder. Then, 15 minutes later, I made the mistake of looking again. This time, he was leaning forward. Just enough. Our eyes met. It felt like he'd been waiting for me to look. Instantly, he screamed, "Don't look back!" His voice was so loud that I flinched. It didn't sound like a normal person yelling. It sounded like pure rage. I immediately faced forward. My heart was pounding. At that moment, I was convinced I was going to die. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I was certain this man wasn't going to let me leave. Then less than 2 minutes later, he spoke again. "Pull over." I obeyed. He told me to keep driving off the shoulder. I slowly left the highway. The tires rolled over dirt and leaves. I kept going until my car was deep enough into the trees that anyone driving by would probably never notice it. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Do not look back." I stared down at the steering wheel. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then I heard movement behind me. The back door opened. My entire body went rigid. I could hear nothing else. Then I saw something in the corner of my eye. A shadow. The man had walked around the car. He was now standing outside my driver's side window. I could feel him there. I knew he was looking at me, but I didn't turn my head. I stared at the steering wheel. 30 seconds passed, then another 30. Finally, I heard movement. The presence beside my window disappeared. The car shook slightly. I thought he'd gotten back into the back seat, but the back door was still open. I hadn't heard it close. 5 minutes passed. I sat there frozen. I didn't know where he was. Maybe he was behind me. Maybe he was standing outside. Maybe he was waiting for me to look. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly moved my eyes toward the back. Nothing. I looked outside. Nothing. The man was gone. There were no footsteps, no sound of the car door closing, no movement in the trees. It was as if he'd simply vanished. I didn't wait. I put the car in drive and sped away. For the next 2 hours, I checked my mirrors every 10 seconds. I didn't care how paranoid I looked. I needed to know if he was following me. Eventually, I reached a small town. I found a police station and told them everything. Officers went out toward the highway, but I never received a follow-up call. They apparently found nothing. No man, no gray sedan, no explanation. Even now, I still think about that night. I never got a good look at the man. He kept himself hidden in shadows. He never allowed me to see him clearly, and I can't help wondering what would have happened if I had looked back. because something in my gut tells me that if I had ignored his warning, I wouldn't be here telling this story today. Story 2. The Figure in the Desert. This happened over a decade ago. At the time, I was really into photography. I'd become fascinated with astrophotography. If you've never done it before, taking good photographs of the night sky requires one thing above all else: darkness. Real darkness. Not the kind you experience in a city when the streetlights turn off. I'm talking about places where there are no buildings, no streetlights, no traffic, no nearby towns. Places where the night sky feels enormous. That's why I decided to drive out into Nevada. Outside of Las Vegas and Reno, huge portions of the state are almost completely empty. Perfect for astrophotography. I drove for hours. Eventually, I passed through a couple of tiny towns. Each one seemed to have maybe 40 buildings. Then even those disappeared. I was alone. Completely alone. I decided to camp beside the highway until sunset. Once the sun went down, I drove another 30 minutes looking for the perfect location. Eventually, I pulled off the road. I grabbed my camera equipment, tripod, camera, batteries, everything I needed. The moment I stepped away from my car, I realized something. I couldn't see anything. Not because it was dark, because it was completely dark. I couldn't even tell what kind of landscape surrounded me. I couldn't see mountains. I couldn't see hills. I couldn't see the road behind me. Nothing. Just blackness. And then there was the silence. It was overwhelming. I set up my tripod, attached the camera, and started adjusting the settings. As I increased the ISO, the camera screen began showing me more and more of the landscape. The image was grainy, fuzzy, but I could make out the desert. Then I noticed something. A shape. I stopped. I leaned closer to the camera. There was something standing in the distance, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. It looked like a person, a human silhouette, standing completely still. I immediately looked up. Nothing. Just darkness. I looked back at the camera. The figure was gone. I stared at the screen. I adjusted the camera. Nothing. I looked up again. Nothing. My heart started beating faster. I tried to convince myself it had been an animal, maybe a bush, maybe a strange shadow, but the shape had looked too much like a person. I grabbed the tripod. I started slowly scanning the area through the camera. Nothing. No movement. No figure. I decided to leave. I packed everything as quickly as I could. I threw my equipment into the back seat. Then I got inside and locked the doors. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I couldn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me. I drove 30 minutes back to the highway. It was too late to drive all the way into town, so I pulled over again. This time, I decided to sleep in my car. I locked every door, covered every window, and crawled into my sleeping bag. Eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up at 2:30 in the morning. Something had disturbed me. At first, I couldn't figure out what it was. Then I heard footsteps, 5 or 6 slow footsteps, right outside my car. I froze. The footsteps moved toward the back, then stopped. Silence. I waited. 20 seconds. Nothing. Then I heard the trunk handle move. Someone was trying to open it, not forcing it, not pulling hard, just testing it, as if they already knew it was locked. My heart began pounding. The footsteps moved again, this time toward the passenger side, then the driver's side. The person was checking the doors, one by one. I stayed completely still. I didn't even breathe. Then everything went silent. Minutes passed. Maybe 10. I finally couldn't take it anymore. I slowly reached toward the window cover. I pulled it back just a tiny amount and looked outside. A large silhouette was standing inches from the window. The person was staring directly at me. I immediately dropped the cover. I backed away. My body went into full panic mode. I quietly reached for my keys. Then I moved into the driver's seat. I started the engine. The car came alive. The figure suddenly appeared in the corner of my windshield. For a fraction of a second, I saw his face, or at least his eyes. Then I drove. I ripped away from the side of the highway. I didn't stop. I drove for hours. I didn't know who that man was. I didn't know where he'd come from. And I still don't know whether he was the same figure I'd seen through my camera earlier that night. But sometimes I wonder, because if he was, that means he had been watching me long before I ever knew he was there. Story 3. The Ghost Town. This happened in early 2019. My then-boyfriend, Connor, and I were on a road trip. We had planned everything except the most important part, the drive. We knew where we were staying. We knew what cities we wanted to visit, but we figured we'd just use GPS to get home. That turned out to be a terrible decision. On our last day, we left around 6 p.m. The drive home was supposed to take about 3 days. Around 11 p.m., we entered a remote section of highway. The cell signal disappeared. The other cars disappeared. And eventually, we realized something. We had absolutely no idea where we were. The GPS stopped working. The road began splitting into smaller roads. Then those roads merged again. The further we drove, the more isolated everything became. Eventually, we pulled over. We were on a narrow one-lane road surrounded by dense forest. We tried every phone. Nothing. No signal, no map, no help. Then Connor suddenly said, "What the hell?" I looked up. There was a man walking toward our car. We hadn't seen a single person for miles. Yet there he was, walking down the middle of this isolated road. He smiled, then waved, and stuck out his thumb. He wanted a ride. Connor rolled down the window. The man said he was heading toward a small town about 10 miles away. He told us we'd get cell service there. Then he asked for a ride. Connor reluctantly agreed. The man's smile grew wider and wider. It was the strangest smile I'd ever seen, almost too wide, almost unnatural. Then he opened the back door and got inside. I watched him through the mirror. He was still smiling. We started driving. Nobody spoke. The silence became unbearable. Every few minutes I'd look back. The man was always smiling, always staring at us. Finally, he leaned forward. "The town is just ahead." The road split. He told Connor to turn left. We did. Within minutes, the road turned into gravel, then dirt, then something that barely qualified as a road. And then we saw the town, old wooden houses, falling apart, windows broken, roofs collapsed, no lights, no cars, no people. It looked abandoned, completely abandoned. Connor stopped. "What the hell is this?" The man smiled. "This is the town." Then he started laughing, quietly. Connor turned around. "Get out." The man didn't move. Connor opened his door, walked around, opened the back door. "Get out of my car." The man still didn't move. Instead, he looked past Connor, toward the houses. That's when I saw them. People, 1, 2, 3, then more. 7 or 8 figures. They were coming out of the abandoned houses, and they were running toward us. "Connor!" I screamed. "Get back in the car!" Connor looked behind him. The man's expression suddenly changed. That smile disappeared. His face twisted into rage. He attacked Connor. Connor pushed him away, then jumped back inside. He slammed the door, locked it. Just as the others reached the car, hands hit the windows. Someone grabbed the door handle. Another person ran around toward the front. Connor floored the gas. The car jumped forward. We drove straight through them. I looked back. The man we'd picked up was gone. I don't know if he'd gotten away. I don't know if he'd been left behind. I don't know who those other people were. We just kept driving. For almost an hour, we didn't say a word. Eventually, we recognized the highway. We found cell service. And finally, we were able to figure out where we were. Later, we tried using Google Maps to find that town. We searched everywhere. We looked at satellite images. We tried to retrace the route. Nothing. We couldn't find it. No abandoned town, no cluster of old houses, nothing that looked remotely like the place we'd seen. Even now, years later, I sometimes search maps. I still wonder where we were. Maybe it was a real ghost town. Maybe we somehow took a wrong turn and ended up somewhere we'd never intended to go. Maybe there was a perfectly rational explanation. But I can't explain the people. I can't explain why the man was smiling. And I can't explain why he seemed to know exactly where we were going. Or why, when we finally found our way back, the road we'd taken didn't seem to exist. Sometimes I think about that night and wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. What if Connor hadn't thrown that man out? What if we'd followed him deeper into the town? What if we'd gotten out of the car? I don't know. And honestly, I don't want to know. Because somewhere out there, in the middle of nowhere, there may be a road leading to a place that isn't supposed to exist. And if I ever find that road again, I know one thing for certain. I won't be stopping.